10 All Sports Central will be going over our next final prediction of this 2020 offseason, and it will be over the Ole Miss Rebels. And this is a team that went 4-8 in 2019, bit of a down season for Ole Miss. Of course, they had a ton of injuries to deal with, and this team in general just was pretty inexperienced last season. But nonetheless, today we're going to be going over 2020, and we're going to be going over whether or not Ole Miss can make a bowl game, as well as a full prediction on every single game on their schedule, along with a full preview in the process. Yeah, with that, let's look at your season trends from 2019 for Ole Miss. Once again, they were 4-8 overall. They were 3-5 between September and October. Then they finished off the season in November as a 1-3 record. So, they did decline a bit over the season. Of course, they were very inconsistent, and a big part of that was because of their injuries. Once again, I mean, this Ole Miss team was plagued with injuries last season, and hopefully they don't have to deal with that in 2020. But they did have a couple of good wins in the process. They did beat Arkansas 31-17, and they also got a decent win over Vanderbilt 31-6. As far as the returning production goes, John Rhys Plumlee is likely to start at quarterback. Of course, they also have Matt Corral in there as well. But I think John Rhys Plumlee should get the main job going into 2020. Of course, last season he did have 910 yards of passing with 4 touchdowns and 3 interceptions. However, he was the leading rusher on this team too. He actually had over 1,000 yards of rushing with 12 touchdowns. And yeah, this team in general last season was a big rushing team. I mean, they hardly had any receivers putting up any action. Of course, as you can see down there, of course, they returned their top receiver, Elijah Moore, which that's going to be pretty big. He was the main receiver on this team, had 850 yards with 6 touchdowns last season. And quite frankly, I mean, he's the only wide receiver on this team that was really used. They had 5 or 6 other wide receivers that had between 100 and 150 yards last season, so really they only relied on him quite a bit. But yeah, as far as the rushing core goes, they do return their top running back, Jerrion Ealy, which he had just right around 900 yards with 7 touchdowns last season. And they do lose their second running back, though, in Scotty Phillips, which he had just over 600 yards with 6 touchdowns last season. However, they do have a good replacement for him in third running back Snoop Connor, which he had just right around 600 yards with 5 touchdowns last season. So overall, this rushing core is looking really good, especially if John Rhys Plumlee looks to be, once again, a big dual threat quarterback. And yeah, I mean, this rushing core in general could be one of the better ones in the SEC for sure. Of course, they were already one of the best in their division, I would say, last season. I mean, when you got 3 really good running backs and a quarterback that's a great rusher too, I mean, that sets up pretty well. But for Ole Miss, of course, they don't really use the receiving core a lot, and it's tough to say whether or not they will more next season. Of course, Elijah Moore's going to have more experience, so that's going to be huge for this team in general. As far as the tight ends go, they do lose their top 2 tight ends. They do lose 1 on the offensive line along with that. They do lose 3 defensive linemen, though, so this defensive line is taking a couple of big hits. And then they lose 1 linebacker along with that, with 2 in the secondary. So this defense is losing quite a bit. They lose 6 total starters on the defense. But once again, this offense is not looking all that bad, I would say. So that's going to help this team a ton, no doubt. That brings up the question, though, how much improvement is possible for Ole Miss in 2020? Once again, when you return a good chunk of your offense and you're losing quite a bit of your defense, it does concern me a little bit, but I do think Ole Miss will definitely improve next season. I mean, I do not see another 4-8 season coming up for Ole Miss. I mean, this is a team that usually makes it to bowl games at least. I mean, they've had some really good seasons over the past decade, so it would not surprise me a single bit to see them make it to a bowl game. I think that's honestly where Ole Miss as a program should be. And I think if John Rhys Plumlee can stay healthy, I think if this team in general can stay healthier than they were last season, it wouldn't surprise me a single bit to see them get to at least 6 wins. Chances for a bowl game next season, once again, I think it's definitely possible for Ole Miss. It would not surprise me a single bit. I mean, their schedule is tough, but it sets up pretty well for them to be able to make that bowl game, which that is what we're going over here next. And of course, they got a tough game to start off the season with Baylor, and thankfully they don't have to travel to Baylor. It is in a neutral location, so but either way, that's going to be a big game to start off the season. I think if Ole Miss can get a big win there against Baylor, I mean, that's going to be really good in the long run, I think, for Ole Miss in next season, of course. I mean, that sets you off with some really good momentum heading into the tough SEC schedule that you guys have. I mean, that first month of action is going to be absolutely brutal for Ole Miss. You got to play Baylor, Auburn, LSU, and Alabama in a span of 5 weeks. You got no bye weeks in there, and then you have to travel to LSU as well as that. So for Ole Miss, I mean, that first month is just going to be really tough. And so I think that Baylor game is going to be extremely important for Ole Miss to win. But it's tough to say whether or not they'll be able to do that. I mean, Charlie Brewer's looking really good right now. And I think the offense in general could be definitely the best in the Big 12. But Nonetheless, Southeast Missouri, that should be a blowover game. But once again, you got Auburn, LSU, Alabama. All three of those games in general are looking really tough right now. As far as your October goes, you got a road trip to Vanderbilt. Then after that, 3-week gauntlet with Auburn, LSU, and Alabama. Then you got Florida at home, another really tough test there. Then you got UConn on the 24th. Followed by a tough road game at Texas A&M, followed by 3 games that are definitely winnable for this team with Arkansas, Georgia Southern, and Mississippi State. So this is kind of an odd schedule for Ole Miss, but I think it does help them in general to make it to a bowl game. I mean, of course, you're going to start off with some negative momentum, especially when you're having to face 3 top 10 teams in a matter of 3 weeks with Auburn, LSU, and Alabama all in the first month. But once you go through those 3 games, I mean, honestly, those final 7 games are definitely all winnable in my opinion. I mean, they could get a big upset win over Florida. It's definitely possible. I wouldn't expect it, but I mean, overall, I mean, it's not all that terrible. But I do expect them to go 1-3 between September. I do think you take a loss against Baylor, and as much as I think Ole Miss fans are going to want to win that game, I just think Baylor is going to be they're just going to be too good next season for Ole Miss to get a win against them, especially considering how well Ole Miss fared out last season with a 4-8 record. I do think you get a win against Southeast Missouri pretty easily. Don't even worry about that one. But yeah, Auburn and LSU, both of those games are really tough, and I kind of want to say that Ole Miss will win in one of those games and pull a big upset, but I just don't really see it happening, not between Auburn and LSU at least, especially that LSU game. It's just going to be really tough to play them in Death Valley in general. As far as your October goes, I do think you take 2 losses, but you also get 2 wins in there. I think you lose to Alabama and Florida both at home, and that's a good thing. At least you got both of those teams at home, but I think you take losses to both of them. I do think you get a close win over Vanderbilt on October 10th, and then you get a win against UConn, an easy one, to finish out your October. And then you get a bye week before your November, so that's going to help a ton. Just kind of transition into that final month. And I mean, there's going to be a lot of pressure on Ole Miss going into that final month, considering they'll be 3-5 by the time they get to that point. So with that, let's look at your November, and I think this team does get the 3 wins that they do need, and I think Ole Miss makes it to a bowl game. I think you do lose that Texas A&M game, but I do think you get good wins over Arkansas and Georgia Southern, both of those being by over 14 points. And then that Mississippi State game is going to be huge for both teams. I think Mississippi State could be fighting for a bowl game in that game as well. So that's going to be a big one there, especially with it being a big rivalry game. Of course, those 2 teams always put up a good matchup. And for Ole Miss, I think with it being at home, that's what gives them the slight edge. I think Ole Miss gets the win over Mississippi State in that one. That sends them to a bowl game. So your record prediction will be 6-6 for Ole Miss next season. I think once again, I mean, the schedule really sets up well. I mean, you do have your tough games really right at the start, but then again, I mean, if you can flip around the momentum, I think Ole Miss could definitely make it to a bowl game. It is certainly very possible. I mean, your 3 easiest games of the season, or your 4 easiest games of the season, are in a matter of the final 5 weeks. So with that, I mean, for Ole Miss, once again, sets up pretty well for them to make it to a bowl game. So yeah, with that, thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this preview, be sure to slap a like on it, subscribe as well. Really helps with the channel, and I'd appreciate that a ton. But yeah, once again, let me know your thoughts on Ole Miss in the comments below too. Let me know your game predictions as well as your record predictions. I'd like to hear those down below. So yeah, I'm excited to hear you guys' responses on that. But yeah, once again, stay tuned for more from All Sports Central. And if you enjoyed this preview, once again, slap a like on it, show some support. It really helps out the channel. But yeah, stay tuned once again. Stay tuned for more. I will see you all later.